This is Brent coming at you with our second overhead squat assessment video. In this video, we're going to go over the signs that we're likely to see during an overhead squat assessment. I have a feeling this is where a lot of people tend to get a little overwhelmed. They have a tendency to think that things are really complex, but the truth of the matter is there's only a fairly small set of dysfunctions that we are likely to see in the overhead squat assessment. And once we systemize those, we break them down by joint action and we list them, I think you guys will find that the overhead squat assessment is actually fairly simple. At the feet, we only have two signs. We have feet flatten or feet turn out. At the lumbopelvic hip complex, we have an anterior pelvic tilt. Now, I know some of you guys have a little bit of a hard time seeing an anterior pelvic tilt. That's cool. What you're probably more likely to see is low back arch, which would be the same thing, or that excessive lordosis. Excessive forward lean. An excessive forward lean is that very, very far tilt, and I'll show you guys how to look for that. We'll look at something called tibio-torsal angle. Asymmetric weight shift we'll look at from the back. I know some of you guys have already seen that winking or that sliding when you have somebody do a squat. At the knees, we're only likely to see them either bow in or bow out. That's the only things we're looking for. And then at the shoulders, do the arms fall or does the shoulder girdle elevate? Guys, these are all of the signs that we are likely to see for the overhead squat assessment. I will talk about some that are a little less common that you might see occasionally in future videos. This is the first layer of the onion. Once we get this down, you guys will actually be able to start creating some very powerful corrective exercise programs. I'm going to have my friend Leanne come out. She's going to help me demonstrate each one of these signs so you guys know exactly what you're looking for. So first things first, let's look at feet flat. Now, first rule of the overhead squat assessment. I showed you guys how to set up the overhead squat assessment in the previous video. If you notice that somebody's feet are flat when they start, you can go ahead and check that box. I'm not looking for necessarily more flattening when they're doing the overhead squat assessment. If they can't get into proper position to begin with, they have that sign. Now, Leanne, when it comes to feet flat, actually does have flat feet to start with. That's a functional flat foot. But she's going to fake it for us, and she's going to go ahead and throw her arms up. And what you guys would see is as she goes down into the squat, she would lose this space right here. So you come back up for me, all right? Make your little arch. She should be able to keep her metatarsal head here, her cuneiform, her navicular. These should not be on the floor. If they collapse and fall on the floor and you guys watch that space disappear at the medial arch, you're gonna go ahead and check feet flatten. Now the next sign she's gonna show us is feet turn out. Now if you guys remember from our previous video, second toe pointing forward, all right, at hip width, which is going to be just underneath our ASIS, is going to be parallel. All we want to see is, does she go big toe forward or further? Because that would be a sign of feet turn out. Go ahead and squat down for me. Let's see that. And Leanne turns into feet turn out very easily because this is part of her common compensation pattern. So go ahead and do that one more time and show them. And we got feet turn out, all right? If I was doing Leanne's assessment right now, I'd just check feet turn out. So now let's look at the knees. Her patella, right here, should track over her second and third toe, assuming that her feet are parallel. So if she had knees bow in, so let's go ahead and demonstrate knees bow in, all right? You'd see this little collapse inward. You notice now her knees are not in line with this imaginary line between second and third toe and her ASIS. A little more rare is to see the knees bow out. All right, there you go, knees bow out. And usually what happens, guys, is you'll see actually the patella, it'll track over about the pinky toe. I know that doesn't seem like much, but anything outside of optimal is potential dysfunction that we could work on and gain a little bit of performance from. Now, after we get through those signs, we need to go ahead and go to a lateral view to see the lumbopelvic hip complex. The first one I'm going to have her show is actually the excessive forward lean, which I know confuses some people. The excessive forward lean is based on the tibia and torso should create parallel lines at the bottom of her squat. So I'm going to have Leanne go ahead and do her overhead squat and pause the bottom. All right. And what I'm going to do is, using these bars, if I line a bar up with her tibia there, so that's that line, and then you guys can see, if I line this up, her tibia and torso angles actually cross, which means they are not parallel by definition. She's bending forward too far, so that would be our excessive forward lean. Go ahead and turn posterior. From the posterior view, we might see an asymmetrical weight shift. I know a lot of you guys, this intimidates you. It's not an easy thing to correct, but we will go over corrections in a future video. But if you see, go ahead and let's demonstrate that, Leanne. What you guys will notice is her pelvis and her backside will actually shift away from the center of her base of support, being her feet here. All right, so let's show that one more time. And that would be asymmetrical weight shift right. Now, the last thing we're going to look at is the arms. You guys have probably seen a lot of the arms fall. Her arms should maintain parallel to her ears, covering her ears essentially. If she can't, now this is one of those signs where you will often see people not be able to get there. If I got her here and I went arms up, and that's as high as she can get, you guys can go ahead and check arms fall forward. I don't need them to fall more forward as she does the squat. This is arms fall forward. Now, we're gonna go ahead and have her start here and then demonstrate what arms fall forward during the squat would look like, so go ahead. And that would be a very common look to that. It doesn't have to be a lot, just in front of the ears. Let's try one more. Good, and then turn around. Let me have you actually back to the camera, and we'll show shoulders elevate. Now with shoulders elevate, what you guys are actually looking for is, does this scapula area start to elevate towards the ears? Now once again, you got to make sure that they started out depressed. If they started out elevated, you can go ahead and check it off, but make sure they started depressed during their squat, and then go ahead, have them do the overhead squat, and see if those shoulders don't end up right up next to their ears like Leanne is demonstrating perfectly. All right, so those are the common signs you guys are likely to see. Now, we broke it down per joint segment. The only thing that you're gonna see a little different on your template is that it's broken down per view. And there's a reason for this. All right, so any assessment that we do, we want to increase reliability. We want to make sure that we are accurate as possible. So certain signs we're only going to see in certain views. We need to make sure that every time we do this overhead squat assessment, that we are looking for those signs in order, in a particular way, to ensure that every time we do this test, it's the same. So from an anterior view, I'm going to look for feet flatten, feet turn out, knees bow in, knees bow out, or arms fall. An anterior view is not a great place, for example, to see a asymmetrical weight shift. That's better seen in a posterior view. After I go through my anterior view, I'm going to go to a lateral view, and I'm going to look for my excessive forward lean, my low back arch, my abdominal distension potentially. That's that abs falling out that I talked about in the previous video. Or once again, arms fall. I'm not going to be looking at the feet in my lateral view. Chances are that an angle from the side is going to kind of play tricks on me on what I'm actually seeing. And then I'm going to go to posterior view to see shoulder girdle at an asymmetric weight shift. So all you guys are doing is taking the signs that are common during an overhead squat and then flipping them so that we can easily get through an assessment. Then after you're done with your assessment and you can sit down and think about it, you can bring these back to the joint that you actually think you're seeing dysfunction at. And in future videos, I'm going to go ahead and show you guys how to break down each dysfunction one by one and create a corrective exercise strategy. Now, a couple things that I get asked about a lot. These are signs that don't actually exist, but you're going to see them. So let me explain. Occasionally, actually, let me have Leanne come out here. You're going to see somebody not feet flatten, but you're going to think you're seeing foot inversion or an increase in that medial arch. I can honestly tell you guys, this almost never ever happens. If you see this during your overhead squat assessment, you're probably not seeing inversion. You're probably seeing a sticky shoe or a sticky sock or a sticky foot on a sticky floor. The person's feet are actually trying to turn out, but from the friction of the bottom of their foot and the floor on these two surfaces, they're actually just starting to roll out because they can't slide. You guys notice I have her in socks on a wood floor. Really, really hard to hide foot turnout, socks on a wood floor. I would suggest this if you can find it. Another sign that you guys will see, go ahead and turn sideways, is occasionally, I don't know if you're going to be able to demonstrate this because it's not your compensation, but occasionally you'll see people go into an overhead squat. They'll go really deep and they'll tilt under at the bottom. Leanne doesn't do it at all. But you guys will see this, where they all of a sudden they get to the bottom and they do this thing. That's not a postural dysfunction. They've just reached the end of their hip flexion range of motion. If you were to try to correct that posterior pelvic tilt you're seeing at the bottom, you're not going to get anywhere. The other thing I get asked about a lot is hands. So when I throw my hands up, do the hands face in or do they face forward? And my answer to you is more or less, it doesn't matter. All right, this is actually radio-ulnar joint motion, pronation and supination, not shoulder motion. The other thing I get asked about a lot is, why isn't the head in the assessment? There's a couple reasons. I know a lot of personal trainers out there are using this assessment, and we don't get enough education on how to correct dysfunction at the neck. So that's reason number one. We don't want to start looking at dysfunctions that we're actually not capable of correcting. Number two, an overhead squat assessment is probably not the best assessment for determining how we're going to correct cervical dysfunction. And we'll get into that into later videos. So there you guys go. Those are the signs that don't actually exist. There is a couple signs that we will see occasionally, like an inadequate forward lean or a posterior pelvic tilt, which I'll explain in much, much later videos. Guys, the first layer of the onion, I like that analogy, right? We got the first layer, and then as we get deeper and deeper and deeper, we'll add more and more pieces. But this is the first layer. You guys got to get this down. It's only, what, 10 signs here, roughly? 10, 12 signs. Once you guys have these memorized, you're good at identifying them, you'll be able to build upon this in a way that helps you create corrective exercise programs that are more effective than you can even imagine, which is going to increase performance and decrease your risk of injury. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I look forward to talking to you again.